Welcome back to Brain Chatter, where we listen past the daily noise and explore topics at the intersection of leadership, workplace culture, profit, and sustainability. This podcast is produced by Ken Chapman and Associates Incorporated, and I'm your host, Derek Brown. Today, our guest is my longtime friend, Tommie Goggans. Today's topic is balance and planning in leadership and life. Here is the understatement of all time: balance is difficult. And for that reason, it's important to stop and think about. And when I think of someone who balances a lot, it's my friend Tommie. I'll introduce him later in this episode, but let me give you a teaser. He is the father of 8 children, and you heard that correct, 8. When it comes to balance, I feel like I could just stop right there. But he is also a husband, a newly minted grandfather of 1. He owns his own financial advising firm, and his wife owns her own private ballet dance studio business. He is extremely active in volunteering in his community and beyond, and he manages to stay physically fit along the way. He's one of those dedicated CrossFit people who puzzle the rest of us. So like I said, this guy knows a bit about the requirement to have balance. And he works in planning, helping other people plan every day. Tommie, welcome to Brain Chatter.
Thank you, Derek. I look forward to our conversation today.
Let me jump directly into the questions. What does good work-life balance look like to you?
Might be helpful for me to just maybe define what work-life balance is for me and how I think about that. So I tend to think of it more like a solar system versus a balancing scale. So let me kind of explain that a little bit. So I really think of my values being like the sun that are in the center of the galaxy, and then the roles that I play, whether that's husband, father, advisor, teacher, whatever it might be, kind of as the planets that rotate around that sun. And then the size of those planets are going to be based on just the importance of that role. So obviously for me, being a husband and a father are very important roles, very large roles. And then other roles like being a business owner, being an investment advisor, being a financial planner. My church is one of those roles. And so all of those things factor in, and then the values, if you will, really provide the gravity that keeps everything in its proper order. So when I think about good work-life balance, I think of it as every role that I play in life having its proper orbit around my values, and then that I'm spending the proper amount of time, the adequate amount of time in each of those roles. So if I'm doing both of those things, to me, I'm maintaining a good work-life balance.
I think that's a great illustration. What's the hardest thing for you about maintaining that balance between all of those different components you just talked about, ranging from personal family life to work life and beyond?
Going back to that solar system example, the challenge for me, I find, is really twofold. It's properly allocating my time among the various roles that are required, and then it's making sure that I have the right roles in the right orbit. That is, making sure that I have the proper planets around the sun. So making sure that the roles that I'm playing at any given point are the roles that I need to be playing. And of course, a part of that is just learning to say no. And if I can do those two things and manage those two challenges, I tend to do a pretty good job of keeping that balance. But for me, those are the two things that often are kind of those recurring challenges that I'm constantly battling.
Absolutely. So has there ever been any specific helpful or insightful advice someone else has given you that has been really useful to you over the years about maintaining balance?
Yes, and I'm thankful for people in my life that have given me that advice, and I'm always someone who feels like I can learn from others. And so really, I would say there are two things. One of them is that start with developing a set of values and principles that really determine kind of your roles in life and what you're going to spend your time doing. And I think that is the most important thing, is for someone to really examine themselves and discover, what are my values? What are the things that are important to me? And let that be the sun in the center of your galaxy, if you will, that determines what your roles are going to be. And then once you've got that determined, then the most important thing is understanding that balance is really more like a trend line than it is a moment by moment assessment. And what I mean by that is there are times in my life where I may be spending a large amount of time doing something that in the grand scheme of things is not as important, say, as being a husband and a father. But at that given moment, that particular task, that particular role requires a great deal of time. So if you were to take a snapshot at that moment, you might say, wow, this guy is just really into this, or man, this must be the most important thing in life. No, not really. But at that moment, it requires the most time. So what I try to do is just keep in mind that it's a trend line. And over the course of my life and over the course of someone's life, you should be able to look at where they regularly spend their time, what are their regular activities, and be able to determine what are the things that are most important to them.
Sometimes the lessons that stick with me the most are the ones learned the hard way, unfortunately. Like the time I touched an electric cattle fence as a kid because my friend had just touched it and it did not impact him. I learned, however, that electric fences pulse periodically. I have never forgotten that lesson from that shock. Any lessons on balance that you've learned the hard way?
I've never touched a cattle fence, but I've learned some hard lessons the hard way. I have. For me, most of those lessons have been around really focusing too much time on things that are not very important, or focusing too little time on things that are very important. So for me, the hard lessons have come in those things. It's the old adage of majoring in the minors and minoring in the majors. When you asked that question, there were two examples that came to mind that I might share. And one of them was just realizing that I was spending too much time in my profession in work. So very early on, as an advisor and working hard to build a business, I spent an inordinate amount of time at work, much more than I should have. And I remember one day, I think at that point, this tells you how long ago this was. I think there were only maybe two kids in the picture at that point. But Erica and I were on our way home, and Tommie, my oldest son, was in his car seat, and we drove past my office building. He looked over and he says, "That's where Daddy lives."
Oh,
And it was like, ooh, wow, that's not good at all. And so that was a really hard lesson. It was really tough for me as a dad to hear that, hear my son say that. And so that was one of those hard lessons where I really had to reevaluate my priorities and what I was spending my time doing. And then the other thing was that, we all know that sometimes we can spend too much time doing good things, where we can be devoted to very good things, very helpful things, very charitable things, but at the same time, we're neglecting maybe other things in our life. So I remember another time where I was spending a lot of time involved in activities related to our church and spending a lot of time, particularly evenings, away. And I remember Erica, coming to me and commenting about that and talking to me about that. And it was very hard to hear. And I would like to say I responded properly. I didn't respond as much of the loving husband that I should have. But after the moment, as I really got some time to think about it, I realized she was right. And it was another hard lesson in we can make mistakes being out of balance, not only doing things that are not important, but we can be out of balance spending too much time doing things that are important. And that we have a lot of activities and a lot of requirements on our time. And, for me, obviously being a husband, a father is right up there. It spend an inordinate amount of time doing that. And that's core to my values, but so is my faith. So is my church. And so, but at any given time, there are different roles I have to play at different times. And I have to be very careful that everything is being given the proper amount of time.
you mentioned, of course, a couple of times the importance of being a father. And I know to your children, you always want to set a strong example. So when it comes to balance, how do you relay messages to them about how to prioritize time and other things in their lives?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that. And it for them, I really think about helping them with their time the same way I think about my time. And for them, it's really helping them to understand that even as kids, they have priorities. They have certain things that are a priority in their life, and they have to be diligent about how they manage their time to achieve those priorities. So in the Goggans household, everybody has household chores. There are morning chores that everybody does. Nobody gets away from that. You graduate from that as you get older. So as you get in high school and you have more outside activities, or maybe you're doing a little part-time work. Obviously, once you get to college, you get away from all that. But everybody has chores, and those are the first things we do when we get up in the morning. So it's helping them understand to be diligent about that, not only doing them, but doing them well. They have schoolwork. We homeschool, and so they do schoolwork that they have to do. And so being diligent about that. We start at a certain time. We have certain subjects that we do at a certain time. And my wife, Erica, does a fantastic job managing that and kind of walking them through that. She's a fantastic schoolmaster. She is that perfect balance of just love and then discipline. So it's really helping the kids understand that you have to be diligent and you have to be focused. And if you're supposed to be doing chores in the morning, well, don't get up goofing around with your brothers and sisters anymore. There'll be time for goofing around, and we love goof around time. But at any given time, you have certain tasks you have to do, and you have to be focused and diligent and dedicated to doing that. So I think even as children, helping them do that and understand that they can do that now will translate for them later in life when now they have to balance things like, their professional role. They have to balance their church role. They have to balance their role as being a wife or a husband. They'll have to balance all this. And so starting early, I think, helps build that foundation for them.
Absolutely. There's an old adage that if you want something done and you want it done well, ask a busy person. Now, I know the logic of that only goes so far, and I don't agree with it for the most part, but it certainly seems that it happens a lot. You and I both have even talked about that in the past.
Yes.
So both in work life and volunteer life, how do you handle the always challenging issue of saying no to someone asking you to do something, maybe even something that you want to do, but something that could cause unbalance for you and everything else that you're trying to balance at the same time?
Yeah, that's a tough one. For me, it really starts with me and making sure that I have the right thinking. You mentioned CrossFit earlier, and I do love CrossFit. And there's a thing where we say in CrossFit that you have to get your mind right. There's the workout part of it where there's the physical part of the workout, and then there's the mental part of making yourself get through the physical part. And if you don't have your mind right, if you're not approaching it the right way, it can be even more difficult than it otherwise would be. And so when it comes to this whole idea of, like you talked about, learning to say no, it really starts with me getting my mind right and understanding a couple things. This is where Tommie has to sit Tommie down and just make sure that he understands some things. And so it starts with me understanding and staying humble and saying, listen, no one person can save the world, least of all Tommie Goggans. If I say no to something, it's not going to be the end of the world. And understanding that overcommitting has consequences. I commit myself to something that someone else needs to be committed to. I'm really taking the place of someone who can do that job better. And it's not necessarily an issue of me thinking that I would do it poorly, because I won't do that. Just the way in which I was raised, the way Tommie Goggans Jr. raised us as kids, it was like, you don't do anything poorly. But I think about it in terms of accomplishing something or doing something. There's this saying that says there are three dynamics to getting something done. It can be good, it can be fast, or it can be cheap. And you only get to pick two of the three. So, for me, if I'm, a lot of my time is spent doing volunteer work, civic work. And so, it's cheap. I'm giving my time, so it's cheap, and I'm glad to do that. I'm a volunteer, and that it's going to be good because that's just the way I was raised. So the other dynamic is the fast. It's the fast. So if I'm overcommitted, what Tommie Goggans is going to do, he's going to do a good job. and he's going to do it at a very, very attractive price, but he's not going to be able to be as diligent or do it as quickly as someone else would. So I'm taking the place of someone who could do that job better. So that's the way I have to think about it. And then lastly, the way I think about that, and that self-talk I give myself, is understanding that if I commit myself to something that I shouldn't commit myself to, I am taking time away from other people that depend on me to do other things, whether that's my family, whether that's clients. That's, time is limited. And so if I'm giving it in places I shouldn't, I'm taking it away from places that I shouldn't.
Absolutely. To that point, what about some strategies for respectful ways to say no to people that keeps them tied to that reality that you just talked about, that where there may be somebody else better to do it at this point in time, or to help them understand that you've got other commitments and you don't want to take away from those commitments by piling on too much? How can you do that politely or respectfully, that no?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question, because it's like, okay, yeah, Tommie, I hear you talking about all this getting your mind right stuff, but at the bottom line, you still have to tell somebody no. And sometimes that's hard because we feel bad about that, and we want to give and we want to help. We don't want to feel like we're, letting somebody down or leaving them in the lurch. I find that being truthful is the most effective way and the easiest way to deal with that. Just good old-fashioned honesty. When I have to decline or I have to say no, I'm just really honest and say, well, here's why I can't do that. I have this commitment, or I'm concerned that it would take away from my time to do this, or maybe I'm concerned that I would not do this job as well as someone else would. I have a recent example of that. There was the president CEO of a not-for-profit organization that asked me to help the organization in volunteer capacity, and asked me about that. And as soon as she asked me, immediately I knew that I could not do the thing that she was asking me to do. It was just there was just no time to do that. And so I said, well, let's talk about that, because we were having a conversation and we agreed to talk later anyway. So I said, yeah, let's talk about that. I have some questions and let's see what that looks like. And so between that time, our initial conversation when we actually got together, I think she could sense my honesty and my sincerity and my reluctance just to commit there right on the spot. And so by the time we got back together, she said, I was thinking about what I asked you to do, and I understand that you're very involved in a lot of things. So I was thinking about, here's some other things that you could do, some other ways you could help. And we were on the same page there. And she already was picking up on my sincerity and honesty and wanting to help, but at the same time, I didn't just want to commit just for the sake of committing. And so I think when we are honest upfront with people and we tell them exactly why we would like to be able to help, I want to be able to help you. Hey, I support you. Hey, I like you. But at the same time, we understand that time is limited and I can't. People get that and understand that. And the one part of what you said earlier, you were saying that saying about, if you want something done, ask a very busy person. Well, the one thing that very, very busy people that are successful, the thing they understand is time is limited. And so when they hear you say that your time is limited in such a way you will not be able to give them what you want to be able to give them, they get that and they understand that.
Great advice. So earlier you provided the illustration of the solar system and how you keep a priority among all the different things in your life that require time. What is the strategy that you employ to maintain that sort of regular barometer, evaluating when one of those planets is off course or tilted the wrong way or in one way or another, not where it should be prioritized in the balance of your life?
No, that's a great question. And I mean, right? I mean, those planets, they can get out of order. Sometimes they can be tilted the wrong way. Winter's a little colder than it should be. Summer's hotter than it should be. So yeah, that's great take on that analogy. I find there are two things that really help me have that barometer for evaluating when things are out of order. One is being self-aware and really working on that ability to be self-aware and that ability to really be honest with myself, to be able to sit back and sit Tommie Goggans down, and then I walk away from him and really just honestly assess myself and tell myself the things that are good, bad, or ugly, really being truthful about that. And then I think it's also important that you have people in your life that will be honest with you, that will be those guardrails, if you will, that in those various roles that will give you some feedback on how well you are being a father, how well you are being a husband, how well you're being someone who is committed to the faith that you've dedicated your life to. All of those things are very important, and having people who will, like when you have the spinach in your teeth and you don't know it, and
Yes.
they will tell you, that's
Yes.
great. And I don't take offense at that. It's like, thank you, because I don't want to be that guy that everyone sees. Man, he's got some spinach in his teeth. But if I knew it, I would have taken it out, but no one told me. So it's just, so yeah, having people like that in your life. And so if you can be honest with yourself, and you can have people around you that will be honest with you and help you in those areas where maybe it's not easy for you to be honest with yourself, you put those two together, and you're going to be able to have a really good indicator of whether everything's in orbit and everything is tilted the way it needs to be tilted.
100%. Well, let me go back and do a better introduction of you. So Tommie grew up in the state of Washington and came to his parents' native state of Alabama to go to the University of Alabama, and then he never left. He met his wife, Erica, at that time and has worked in financial advising for over 20 years. They live in Gadsden, Alabama. Tommie has served on the boards of directors and boards of trustees of many organizations, such as the Community Foundation of Northeast Alabama. And he has served as a Rotary Club assistant governor and head of training for about half of all Rotary clubs in Alabama. I could talk about his biography for an hour and a half, but I'll just recommend that if you'd like to get to know Tommie more, you can find him on LinkedIn or visit his company website at goggansgroup.com. I'll put the link to both of those in the notes of this podcast so that you can find them easily if you'd like. For now, I'll move on to asking you some more questions, Tommie. A big part of your work life as an independent financial advisor is planning. You help people plan the financial piece of their future, as in, when will they have enough money to retire? How much money do they need to set aside for possible emergencies and life events, college, weddings, so on? How do you see balance playing into the way people plan? Is balance either a spoken or implied part of many of those planning conversations that you have day to day, week to week?
Yes, balance really is at the core of helping clients plan for their financial future. I mean, when you think about financial planning and what it is essentially determining the sun of your financial galaxy, and then getting all your financial planets in the right orbit. That really is what it is. I mean, if you think about it, you're establishing a goal based on what's important to you, or establishing a number of goals based on what's important to you, and then from there you establish some consistent activities based on those goals, some things that you're going to do on a recurring basis, and then lastly you allow the goals and the activities to really control your financial decisions. So when you think about it, a good plan really is seeking to ensure that there is balance in your financial life, so that you have a way to gauge that. So, if your goal, for example, is to retire at a certain point, well, then there are certain lifestyle decisions that you're going to make, or certain things that you're going to do or not do based on that goal. If you decide that, you want to be able to buy a second home in a certain place at a certain time, well, there are going to be some other things that you're going to give up along the way in order to have that goal later. So really, financial planning sits atop a foundation of balance. And any good financial advisor, and there are plenty of them out there, any good advisor will be very specific and will have lots of conversations, and implied and specific conversations around the idea of good financial balance.
I've heard discussions many times before about people who worked and worked their whole life and worked really hard, and they looked forward to retirement. That was the big thing ahead that they spent a whole lifetime building up to, but they ignored their physical well-being along the way. And then in the end, they could not enjoy the fruits of all their hard work because they weren't physically healthy enough in retirement to do so. Have you seen this combination of bad balance and lack of planning?
Yeah, wow. I mean, Derek, you and I could spend an entire podcast probably just on this alone. Um, it's really it saddens me, and it's troubling to see the way in which, as Americans, we as a whole, as Americans, really ignore our physical well-being. In particular, when you look at our health and nutrition, exercise and nutrition. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to go out there and do CrossFit. That's my deal, and I like to do that. But there are a lot of things that we can do, and one way or the other, whether it is group, not group, competition, not competition, we all need to be physically active, and we all need to pay attention to our nutrition in order for us to have longevity in our lives. And it's a topic that is often complicated. It's often filled with a lot of misinformation. It's often manipulated for financial gain. Sometimes you see all three of those happening at the same time. But physical well-being is very, very, very important. And man, how sad is it and just tragic is it for someone to work hard and exercise balance financially, and then they get to a point where it's time to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to really enjoy the fruits of the harvest, if you will, and they can't because of poor health. I think that is a very, very often overlooked part in this. Yes, I absolutely agree. That has to be at the core of the way you think about balance and structuring into your priorities. One of your planets needs to be what are you doing for your physical health? And it needs to be intentional. Just like anything else, it won't just happen because you want it to happen. It happens as the result of a plan and activity. A lot I could say there. There's one book that came to mind. I don't know if I can recommend a book or not.
Of course.
Okay. Years ago, I read this book called Salt, Sugar, Fat: How the Food Giants Hooked Us. It's written by a guy by the name of Michael Moss. And it is an outstanding book to help you understand the difference between food as it is and how it comes out of the ground, and food as we sometimes process it and make it to be, and just understanding those differences and understanding that there is an agenda by some out there who want us to look at food solely as a medium for enjoyment, and not also looking at it as a way to sustain the health of our bodies and really for our bodies to operate. And we have to look at it both ways. I love food just like anybody else. Okay, so but we have to understand that food has two components. It spends a little bit of time on our tongue and a whole lot of time in our body, and it affects our body. And so we just have to have balance even in how we think about that. So anyway, I don't want to get off and become an online nutritionist in a few moments. But anyway, yes, I think that's an important part of overall balance.
Absolutely. And I'll link to that book as well in the show notes along with your contact info. So outside of financial planning, which of course you do day in and day out with clients, tell me a little bit about how you plan your own days, weeks, months, and years. What are some strategies that you have gotten accustomed to using over the years and that have given you the best results for your own planning?
For me, I live by calendar. So everything goes on my calendar. And I have a calendar, and it was one of those things that was taught to me early on by a mentor when I first started as an advisor, and to really structure everything on a calendar. You could look at my calendar, and there's a time I get up, there's a time that I work out, there's a time that I do certain things. I plug into that calendar all the things that I have to do on a weekly basis. Some of those are recurring things that I do. Some of those are meetings or activities that I do every week. My client meetings go on calendars. Times that I'm going to spend maybe researching something for a client or in doing some investment research. All that goes on the calendar, and that really dictates my time. And then the other thing is that I've learned is really to look at my daily allocation of time in terms of accomplishing daily priorities versus trying to get through a to-do list. And there's a difference there. There was a book that I read by a guy named Kevin Kruse, 15 Secrets Successful People Know About Time Management. And it was really eye-opening about how we manage our time and how we tend to think about time. And it really gave me some good foundational tips in how I manage it and think about time is this limited resource. It's this limited resource. We don't get any more of it. And everything we do, we are spending it. We can't go make any more of it. We can't work harder for it. We have the time that we have. And oh, by the way, we don't even know how much time in total we have. We don't know. It's limited. At some point, our lives will come to an end. And between now and then, we're just simply making the most of that time. And so understanding that way and spending your time that way and planning it that way is very important. And, that's not to say that we're these kind of robots or, automatrons where we live everything by the calendar. I do not do anything else. No, it's not like that, but it's just, you put enough structure in your time so that you can make sure that you're doing the things that you love and the things that are most important to you. If I don't build a calendar and, kind of trim the hedges of everything else that infringes on the time that I have, say, for example, to spend with my kids, then that time will be spent somewhere else. And I don't want that. So I have to have structure so that everything is in place. And so for whatever that is for you, whether that's your children, whether that's your church, whether that's maybe some charitable cause, maybe that's achieving something on your bucket list, some dream you've always wanted to do, you have to structure your time such that your time will be spent the way you want it to be spent, doing the things that are going to give you satisfaction and help you accomplish and achieve what you were created to do.
Great answer. Thank you. So let's say that you were asked to speak to a group of young people who are about to enter the workforce for the first time, doing whatever that might be, whether it's becoming a welder or whether it's stair-stepping toward becoming a entrepreneur or company manager or whatever that may be. But this is their jumping off point. What would be your very concise advice to those people starting out in their work career about balance?
That is a great question. And I love how you draw the distinction there between the differences in professions. And really, it doesn't matter whether you are seeking to be the very best welder that you can be, or you're seeking to be at the beginning of a career to be the very best neurosurgeon you can be. The thought process is the same. This is what I would tell that group of young people. I'd tell them, one, that they need to clarify their values. You need to understand what your values are and let those values dictate to you a set of principles that you're going to live by. And you need to make sure those are crystal clear. You understand them. You could articulate them. Someone came to you and said, well, why do you do this? Why do you believe this? What do you think about this? You got it down cold, crystal clear. You've clarified your values. Number two, I would tell them that you need to prioritize your activities based on those values. So let your values and your principles dictate your activities. Let your values dictate the roles that you are going to play in life. And then number three, I would tell them regularly evaluate their progress on living a life based on those values and activities. You have to do some regular self-evaluation. And so I would tell them if they can do those three things, I think they will be well on their way to ensuring that they live a life of proper balance and a life that provides them peace for the most part and satisfaction and a level of just joy in life. Doesn't mean things are always going to be great. Doesn't mean things are always going to be easy, but we can have satisfaction in life even though we endure the ups and downs of life.
Fantastic advice. Thank you. So what have I failed to ask you in this interview that I should have asked you? Is there anything that you would like to add?
Derek, as always, you've been the catalyst of thoughtful, engaging conversation, and I thank you for the opportunity just to spend some time with you and your listeners. So I think you did a great job of approaching the topic of maintaining the proper balance.
Well, thank you, my friend. I will post the link to your LinkedIn, Tommie, and to your website, as well as the book recommendations that you provided in the show notes. Thank you very much for being a guest today and being so generous with your time, your insights, and your kindness.
It was my pleasure, Derek. Thank you.
Brain Chatter is a production of Ken Chapman and Associates Incorporated. We assist clients across North America and beyond with leadership development, corporate culture transformation initiatives, behavior-based professional development for health and safety issues, individual and team assessments, conflict and performance management, succession planning, team building, and more, making a difference in organizations and individuals' lives for over 40 years. Learn more at leaderscode.com.